we have been set equivalent to like the Porsche of coding agent. Claude Code is often set equivalent to like Homer's car, of like this over-engineered, like everything is bolted on. The pickup of the bugs, like most of the bug reports, they shouldn't go through like a developer's hand. I think like they should go to the agent, and then we actually have to have something which is an unsolved problem. Like, when is it safe for the agent to push directly, and when should it go to something like a pull request and go through human eyes? I think like this is one of the big unsolved problems. How do we actually send it to the agent? How do we orchestrate and keep an overview of all of that? How do we actually then delegate to a human the important decisions? How do we make all the decision making around like, hey, how to architect a system, what's worth building, what am I working on next, like what are new features idea that are actually worth picking up? The OpenClaw is an experiment of what, if you extrapolate like the next 5 years out, what can an AI personal assistant be, which has basically access to your entire life, all your data without any restrictions, and you give it a shit ton of tools. No company could have put that out. Like, this could have only come from like open source or like SOTA developers, because it's so risky and the liability risk and the abuse risk is so high. Should you be scared of it? Yes, I am too.
Nicolay Gerold is a German developer who has many years of experience in applied AI, but most recently, he has been pioneering work in AI coding agents as the founding engineer at AMP, the Porsche of coding agents. We start by first talking about how it is to build startups, AI startups in particular, in Germany and Europe, touching on the still kind of new EU Inc. But we then very quickly dive into the core topic of this episode. We talk a lot about coding agents, and agents like the famous OpenClaw, of course. How to build them, and how to continuously update them for every new generation of backbone LLMs. But what was probably the most interesting and personally life-changing for me was when Nicolay shared possibly not so common advice on how to get the most out of these coding agents. Overall, Nicolay shared so many interesting ways to use coding agents that I had never even considered. And he was very good at explaining when and how to use each technique. Nevertheless, we of course also stay critical and highlight the things these agents can't do. Yet, at least. On this topic, we talk about how developers will likely not be fully replaced by AI if you know how to navigate this rapidly evolving space. I hope you can learn as much as Max and I did from this conversation with Nicolay Gerold. Enjoy. Okay, I'm really happy that we finally got to the next episode. Today we're talking with Nicolay Gerold, and we'll just directly jump to the most interesting question, which is, share us a bit about your background. If nobody knows who you are, what would you tell them?
So I think, like, first of all, this was the best pronunciation of my name I ever had on a podcast. I think like no American ever has handled it, and that's like the beauty of having another German on the podcast. So I'm from Germany. I think like I will go into like my technical background. I didn't study informatics. I studied like it was a mix of business and computer engineering, it was called, which was more like electrical engineering plus some computer science. And I focused mostly on reinforcement learning. So went into more the robotics direction. And this was before LLMs were a thing. And then in like the final years of my studies, I think like it was in the first year of my master, I stumbled upon LLMs. And this was in like 2019, so before COVID hit. And I was doing some NLP stuff with a buddy of mine on translation and training a few models. And a friend of mine then said, hey, you have to check this stuff out, and pointed me to some research papers. And then I basically started like playing with the models, using them for the NLP work we did for some courses. And it was like, for me, it was like amazing. And especially with these 30s models, was like, most of the stuff you got out of them was garbage. But then like every 10 runs, you got something really good out of it. And I fell in love with LLMs and started like fine-tuning them, playing more with them. Then we organized a hackathon with OpenAI at the TUM, at the university I studied, and went like deeper and deeper and started freelancing on that as well. So I basically went directly, like while I was still studying, started to freelance and started to work for especially banks and insurances and fine-tuned models for like information extraction. So from like insurance contracts or banking contracts to extract information out of them. And this was before like tool calling or information extraction was a thing. And this is like how I got my start. And then I basically turned that into a company, so an agency, which turned into a venture builder. And in that we have like a few startups going. And at the moment I'm also working on a coding agent at AMP, which is basically like Sourcegraph started and now it's spinning off into its own company.
So in 2019, which models were these? Were these like BERT type encoder only models, or were they encoder decoder? Or
there was one encoder decoder, I think from Microsoft. I can't remember the model name anymore, which came out, and then it was like GPT-3, which came outside. I think it was 2020.
2020, yeah, for early access. I think 2020.
Yeah, and then a bunch of the like encoder only models as well, which were like BERT based. And it was like a variety of them, which we played around with. But they were like, the Microsoft model was very bad. And it was, I think, 350 million parameters. And this is like the one I used the most to do like fine tuning. And it's like thinking back, it was nuts, like how much hoops you had to jump through just for like getting a fine tuning setup up and running for like what at the time was like a really big model for like ML terms, and now dwarfs like in comparison to what is like a small model with like 7 billion parameters.
Yeah. It is crazy. It's funny how there was this like increase in size, and then the size got smaller again, but the performance got better, and then there's been this second wave of increasing size, right?
Yeah, it's like the double dip, like the double descent.
Yeah. It's like going up and then back and then back up again, you know?
Yeah, I'm not sure whether we ever will stop. Just like, I think we always go into like, we'll go up and down. Like, okay, we find like a better representation or better training data to train it on. But then like we want to represent way more stuff or just like cram way more information into that, do more RLHF on like a bigger variety of tasks. So we make them bigger again and then we try to bring it down again.
Oh, no. I was going to say, how did you find the business environment in Germany, like setting up your own sort of startup freelancing agency and dealing with German bureaucracy?
It's shit. So Germany, in the agency, we in the end then decided we're not going to work with German or European companies anymore. So we only worked with Americans and British companies because it often was just a hassle. So in some cases, we waited for like 6 months to actually get access to the data, and we were just sitting on our hands and doing nothing, which is like theoretically nice because you're still getting paid. But from a developer perspective, it's like, it's really frustrating because you're in a call after a call, just talking to them until you actually get the access. And that's just because the bureaucracy and all the regulations around data and AI are really confusing. So you always have to bring in like compliance departments and lawyers.
Yeah, I can actually also confirm that during my studies, I worked at a German research institute or research community, the Fraunhofer Gesellschaft, at the Heinrich Hertz Institute, and I worked in the applied AI department, worked on a project, and it was so frustrating because the data exists, but it's just impossible to get your hands on it. We were a publicly funded project as well, right? So as if it's publicly funded, it's even tighter, and you have to argue for every single penny that you spend. And basically people said, we have this problem, please solve it. And we're like, okay, we can solve it. Give us this data and then we can solve it. And like, yeah, no, won't happen. And I was like, okay, well, how are you expecting us to do that? And yeah, another really cool headline that I saw was that in Berlin, there was supposed to be like a huge data center built, right? And that they got the approval for that. But that was 5 years ago. And they have not built a single thing because of some bureaucracy that they had to pass through to get the permissions to actually build the site. So they have like a huge lot of land somewhere in Berlin for like a huge data center, but nothing has happened there yet. it's really, really, really frustrating. I mean, I'm now in Japan, right? I'm working at an American startup, but with an office here in Tokyo. So it feels very different, right? So I can definitely second that.
Yeah, and I think like there's a reason why like Germany has little really good software to speak of, and yeah, we have SAP and stuff like that, but it's like in the
I've only heard
recent like
complaints
20
about
years,
SAP.
yeah. From the recent 20 years, we don't have any software to speak of because I think like it's really counter the German culture, which is much more, hey, like waterflow, where it's like you're very iterative, step by step. You're first getting all the approvals, you're scoping everything out, you're planning everything, and then you're starting step by step, which works well for something which is really engineering related most of the time. But for something which is like software, which builds on being iterative and getting a lot of feedback from users and customers, I think there it's just like the German culture isn't there, and also it's like move fast and break things and put something out which is imperfect. Also, just like it isn't a German thing, and I think like this is what's hurting a lot of companies right now as well, because you're kneecapping yourself just through the bureaucracy and through the process, so you can't actually keep up to date and keep up with like American competitors.
I think that's super interesting. And I could almost go on a tangent because I'm curious to hear your thoughts on like EU Inc., this idea of making it easier to set up a European-wide entity. It's a bit off topic, but I think we should keep it. I think we should go just to hear about EU Inc., because I think that will be really interesting.
To be honest, I think like Andreas Klinger, like the main guy behind EU Inc., might be pulling Europe and the startup ecosystem in Europe out of the gutter like single-handedly. And it's like we have a lot of founders. We have probably among the most technically capable people, but most of them leave. So like a lot of friends from mine from college, they went abroad to IC to actually start their companies. Some of them come back, but it's still incorporated in the US, so the money ends up there. At the same time, the companies which come back and are successful, like Langdog, for example, from Mark Klinger and a few other Toon people, they just got bought by ClickHouse. So also like it's a successful company, it's successful in Europe, but it gets bought by a US company. So in the end, we don't keep it. And I think like EU Inc. is going into a direction that actually VC funding gets way easier in Europe. So actually the founders don't have to go abroad because they can get money here easier, and also at rates or evaluations which are more sensible, because in the US you usually quite easily get 10 times the amount what you get in Europe, just because there's much more money and a much more like, hey, we're just gonna give it, do whatever you want and just build a good company and then come back.
So then what did it take to do freelancing, right? I mean, that's like a mini company that's only yourself, and you're building solutions for other institutions, right? And how did you get into that, and how did you build up partners or clients?
It's like freelancing, I think like the Freiberufler, which is like one form of like single person enterprise basically, is very easy to set up. And this is only like it's only for a certain set of jobs which can do that, and like doing AI or doing informatics is among them. And this was fairly easy to set up. I think like the getting clients, I had a pretty good network before that already. Like I worked a bunch in consulting. My dad was in banking for a long time, and he had a bunch of really interesting contracts, and he was doing like a lot of presentations at different banks and workshops. So I had a bunch of like contacts already and got in through that. And then it was mostly word of mouth. Like I got referred on and got like more and more clients through that. But I think like freelancing, or in general, like having a company in Germany, it's just a lot of hassle. Like you have like so much stuff to think about, and usually like the tech stuff alone costs you so much time. And then also like there are so many foot guns you can hit when you aren't careful and when you aren't doing it when you're doing it for the first time, that it's really easy to go bankrupt fairly early or have a really high tax liability at the point where it's actually scaling up and you're making a lot of money and you're reinvesting it, and then the tax bill comes. And when you don't foresee that stuff because you don't know it, because you're a first-time founder, it's like you're in for a hard time. And I think like this is what's most annoying in Germany, because it's like you first have to jump through a lot of hoops, setting up a company, like incorporating it, notarizing all the documents, and then you run into that, hey, you're getting customers, you're doing all of that setup, which should be your main focus. And then you're scaling up, you're making more and more money, and then like the taxman comes and hits you like with a clap on the head. And it's like, it's usually unexpected. Yeah, theoretically, if you would have read up, you could have prevented it, but it's so complex that you usually just like can't, because you're a tax attorney, like you have no clue. And also for a startup, you shouldn't have to focus about that. And I think like there are a lot more stuff which like Europe can do. And I think like tax exempting startups which are raising money or like which are scaling up right now is like one of the things, or like just easing the tax burden, or like making it really easy, like flat 25% taxes on the stuff, and just like fuck the rest. Like make it easy to understand, make it easy to apply, and you can do it. But it's like all the different types of like forms you have to send and all the different types of taxes, like no one has like a good overview of what you actually have to do as a founder.
One thing that this is a throwback to our previous, me and Boris's previous discussions in the previous episode, but one thing that I would say really characterizes you in my mind is you're like extremely agentic. You know, you're extremely like proactive and just doing stuff and getting shit done. You know, you said there you had a good network, but partially that is, you know, you just like finding people interesting and reaching out to them, right? Like you just proactively build your network.
Yeah, it's like I go head first through a wall. Like it's like this was always myself. My mom always joked like about me, I don't have gears. I'm always like just flat out, and that's it. And I think like this is most of the stuff I do. And I think like I realized early that usually your career at some point will be limited by the quality of your network. And so I always wanted to build like a really good one and meet interesting people. And like the podcast I had was like one of the efforts I had in that direction, and through which I also met like Max.
Well, this story sounds so familiar because that was also exactly the reason why or one of the main reasons why I started my YouTube channel, because I wasn't good at meeting people or talking to people. Again, in our first episode, highly recommend to watch that one or listen to that one. Shameless plug. I wasn't good at talking to people. My favorite story is when I decided I want to get to know people and want to take networking seriously, because I learned that it's insanely important. I saw that there was a networking event for Weights and Biases in Berlin. So I took all my guts together, all my courage together, drove there, and then I sat in front of the building and was shivering. I was so scared to go in there. It sounds so crazy to people, but I was really, really scared. And no, I'm going in there. And then I went inside, and they had like some invited guest speakers, right? Also, for example, from Gina AI or some other GraphCore, I think. And they had like obviously some chairs where I could sit, and I sat like on the very corner or very edge, such that only one person could sit next to me and not like on the other side. So minimizing points of contact. And after that, I didn't speak to anyone. I only went up to the presenters because I had questions, and I talked to two people, and then was like, okay, well, everyone's talking and eating pizza, and what am I gonna do? I just went home. I just went home. Hey, but I mean, you have to try at some point. You have to force yourself to do uncomfortable things to grow. But that was one experience. But luckily, my YouTube channel was good enough to get Max to reach out to me. And that's also always the thing that really cool researchers just want to talk about. When I joined Sakana, And I had my introduction, right? I was like, hey, yeah, here I did this research. And then somebody said, oh, I also follow you on YouTube. And then everyone was like, oh, what? He has a YouTube channel? And then everyone talked only about that. I was like, yeah, but I mean, I also have research, right? I mean, no, YouTube. But yeah, it's just the agency that Max described. That's very, very popular and powerful. And then getting to know people.
Yeah, and I think like what's the easiest cheat code for that? Like if you go over the hump, like if you decide you want to do something, like it's just getting like as a speaker on like these meetups, which is usually quite easy. Because then like also, first of all, like giving a talk, I think like it's only that like extra hop above the nervosity, like if you're really nervous. And everyone wants to talk to you usually after your talk. So it's like you're already like in there and you're the interesting guy to talk to. So you don't have to come up to people to actually ask them and start a conversation, which is a little bit of a cheat code usually, like when you go to these meetups.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't think about that. Yeah. No, for me, another thing that I would have loved to do is do these hackathons like you described. Like I've never done a single hackathon and I would love to have done that. That also sounds like so much fun and just an experience to just get to know a lot of people, right? It would have been really cool.
Yeah. I invited Max to one, but he is like traveling again. Like,
I know.
Max is traveling all the time.
Eventually, it's going to happen, you know.
Eventually, we'll see.
Can you tell us a bit more about your podcast? Like for our listeners, we'll link it in the show notes and whatever else. And like, what did you learn and get out of it apart from building your network, as you mentioned? And what would you do differently if you started it all over?
So I'm in process of starting it all over. So it's I'm bringing a friend of mine on to do it with the podcast. I had a first podcast while I was in university with a buddy of mine as well, and we were just chatting about like new research paper, which we found interesting. And he then basically went abroad for his PhD to the US, so we stopped it. And I always had this like podcast bug because I really love listening to podcasts, but I always felt like there is a lack of podcasts on like applied AI. There are a bunch of them who start in that direction but usually they drift off and become way more general. And I think like this is what I see in a lot of podcasts. They get more and more popular and they lose the appeal they originally had to their like original target audience because they have to attract a broader and broader audience. And this is why I just like, I started a podcast just recording the conversations I already had, because I always had this nasty habits when I had a question about an implementation, which I was doing, that I just wrote the open source maintainers of a project and just like asked them to hop on a call and pummel them with questions. And I just started recording those. And then over time, I basically got a little bit more structured. Then I did like seasons, one of which, for example, on search, and did like 15 or 20 episodes only on search and AI in search. And then a little bit of MLOps. And then I stopped. And now I'm picking it up again. And I think like in a podcast, there are multiple angles you can take. Like if you're going after only, hey, I want to be educated, it's like just like a fun project for me, which it was for me. It's like I didn't want to cater to the broadest audience. I wanted to do each episode, find a really interesting guest, go really niche into one topic. So I did a lot of research, and whether it interested like 100 people, 10 or 500, I didn't really care, because I wanted to go into a topic. I wanted to learn more about it. And I knew there were other people out there like me who cared deeply about that specific topic. And this is one of the beauties about podcasts. They are out there forever. And usually like when you're researching about a niche topic, eventually they will stumble over your episode, because it's like probably one of the few who actually talk specifically about that. If you want to cater for like, hey, I want to like grow an audience and just like be a little bit more famous or be like an influencer in a certain space in your niche, I think you have to be a little bit broader. And I think like then you have to play a different game and do way more social media, be really targeted about like finding good guests in your niche as well, which actually give you a little bit more reach, because in the beginning you probably have little. But this is really like, it's not a game I want to play in or play with. so this, like, for me, this is also the next learning. I played it a little bit like at the end, where I went more into like ML ops and talked to a few like founders, like CEO types. And it's like just like the starting conversation, which I did before the podcast, or like for prepping the podcast, usually bored me so much that I just said, hey, sorry, it's like, it's not a fit. And that's how I like want to revamp the podcast at the moment. And one of the podcasts I really admire is Acquired, which is like a business podcast, which does this like 4-hour deep dives into companies. Like they did a really good one on Google, which is nuts. And they talk to like 30 people from within Google and basically break down the entire business, how it evolved, what is its moat. And I think like I want to do the same for basically applied AI, and basically take the time, really spend a while with a topic, like at least a month researching it, implementing stuff, training models. And then based on the questions I find, which are like beyond my reach and beyond my knowledge, interview a few people who are already experts and in the field, and then cut it up into long episodes and do like way longer sessions, way more content, but less episodes in the end.
Yeah, that definitely sounds very fascinating.
Yeah, one thing that resonates with my own experience here is this idea of doing things for you and putting them out there, and that it will generate some value for some people, but that's also not just the end goal in itself, right? Because I find that when I like read a paper and I write about it, like it helps me internalize what I've learned, right? Helps me remember it better in the future. But I just like spit it out on the internet, and like, I don't know, depending on the summary, maybe 50 people, maybe, 1,000 people read it and interact with it in some capacity, right? And it's out there for future, so some future person like stumbles upon it in a random search, finds some value in it, a year from now. That's cool.
Yeah, and is it also something you would naturally be doing? Because I think like you read a lot of research paper and you try to understand them and break them down also for your work. And it's like when you have something that you're like having fun at and you're already doing, you will always do it for longer and probably better than anyone else. And there are other people who are probably interested in that as well, and you just have to put it out. And I think like having fun is one of the biggest advantages you can have, because you will outlast everyone else, because most of the people who have to read research papers probably don't have so much fun at it.
I, for example, usually don't have that much fun coding. I myself am more of, I come from the researchy background, right? And I like coding because I can use it to realize my ideas and experiments, right? But I'm not the kind of person that just writes code for the sake of writing code, or coding competitions, or being good at lead code, or that kind of stuff. I have like an idea and a vision, and I want to realize that, and that's where we have to write code to do that. And that's why I'm really, really excited that nowadays we have very powerful coding tools and coding agents. For example, be it the Claude Codes of the world, the Codex, the Geminis, the Cursor, or the AMP, or those from AMP. And you are, as far as I can tell, very well educated in that space and have built some really impressive products, I would say. So I would be really curious to dive a bit deeper here, maybe, into that space. And hear what your thoughts are on the whole landscape of all the different coding tools that there are. Are they all just the same, or are there nuanced differences? Is it worth it to do some type of project in Codex and some in Claude Code, and some using some open source coding model or a backbone model for coding? What would you say? What's your experience on that end?
I think like in the end, I think coding agents are becoming a little bit like the IDE was the thing like a few years back. Like every developer had this like perfect setup, configured it differently, set it up in its own way. And I think like I still use NeoVim, and I know a lot of people from like who are also using NeoVim, and everyone is like always like pushing plugins around, optimizing his setups. And I think like coding agents becoming the same thing. Like everyone has his favorite flavor. Everyone is like adding stuff, adding like slash commands, skills, hooks, and optimizing his own setup. And I think like you have to find like how you become most productive. And I think the artisanal or like this craftsmanship vision of like coding, I think like the people who are doing that have the hardest time with coding agents. Like I'm similar to you. Like I don't care about how I get there. I don't care about which programming language I use. It's like I want to build something and I care about the end result. And I want to like solve problems and build cool shit. And I think like this is the spirit of the people who are getting the most out of coding agents. And then like which one is the best for you is like, I think like you just have to try them and find it out. And I think like you have to build more of a like philosophy of using coding agents instead of like being really struck down of like which implementation or which harness of coding agents is the best one. But I think like the space is changing so fast that you always have to stay learning. And I think like developers theoretically are that because the space is like evolving all the time, but they are really setup dependent. So they hate when stuff changes about their setup. And I think like this is why the space is like so polarizing and everyone has like his favorite flavor of coding agent because they have spent time setting it up and they don't want to change anymore. And I think like you have to be able to switch between different providers, different harnesses to actually like be able to take advantage, because I think like right now 5.3 is like way better than Opus. So I think it switched from Anthropic being the best coding agent to like Codex 5.3 being the best coding agent. And a lot of people don't like that because the way you interact with Codex is really different. It's much less interactive and more async, and you have to prompt it a little bit differently. And in the beginning, you will get worse results because you learned how to interact with Opus and how to basically hold its hand correctly. And I think like this setup switch and this like learning, being adaptive to like what model, what harness am I using, is what you should learn and build like more of a general philosophy, like a way of phrasing things, like how do I basically delegate work? When do you like how to notice like when an agent is going off track, but also how to basically write it specific enough so the agent can do its work, how to engineer your code base so it's set up for the agent to work best in. And I think like this is much more interesting than actually like, okay, which coding agent is the best? What is the perfect spec I'm writing? Like, I don't think that matters that much anymore. The models are so good by now that usually like clear instructions are what floats the boat. And then it's more like, hey, I'm now optimizing my code base around the agent and setting it up in a way that the agent can do its work.
The next step is then to optimize for token use and using fewer tokens by just using Chinese characters. Have you tried any
I don't
of the
think that
Chinese
will
models?
I don't think that will happen because like using coding agents, like comparatively, they are cheap to human wages. Like when you think like the standard Google developer is like earning $500K a year, and yeah, Max, looking at you, and then it's like a coding agent when it's costing like $50, $100 a day, but getting the work done of like one developer and I can scale it up infinitely, like it's kind of cheap.
One thing I love here actually is on the kind of Opus versus Codex user experience is that once you've set up Codex on your repo, you can be out and about and basically send like the equivalent of an SMS through the ChatGPT app, and it just spins up a pull request. So like I'm in the taxi going into town and I'm like, oh, I think I should add like DeepSeek support to my side project, and I just tell Codex, and when I get home there's a pull request waiting for me and I'm like, amazing.
Yeah, I had a similar experience with Claude Code as well. I was at lunch alone and I was like, you know what? I want to implement this new feature. And I always spend a lot on big features. I spend a lot of time on the planning doc. And I wasn't comfortable enough to have my just in my Claude app just to tell him, here's the GitHub repo, just code up stuff. I wasn't too happy with that or too confident in that yet. But I was just like, scan the entire repo. I want to have this new feature. Give me the full planning doc. Let's discuss this. And I was just chatting with him. Oh, this looks cool. Yeah, good idea. It's literally just chatting with a coworker and designing this planning document. And then when I got back onto my laptop, I was like, okay, please implement this planning document. And it was it feels so so out of this world. It's crazy.
Yeah. The only thing like I'm a little bit scared of, because I'm a little bit obsessive. I don't want to code on my phone, because I think it's like I'm already like spending so much time working. I don't need something else, which I always have with me, to actually do more work.
Yeah, fair. Just sitting there at lunch and not enjoying lunch, but just chatting with Claude to prepare your next coding sprints.
Yesterday on Valentine's Day, I sat there. Sorry, babe, I have to implement this first.
Sorry, Claude needs my attention. Codecs need my attention. They need attention too, okay?
Attention is all you need.
Oh my Jesus Christ.
And so have you used the latest kind of frontier Chinese models? How do they compare in your eyes?
It's so I think like we are at the moment, one of them, like Kimi K 2.5, is we are putting that in right now for a different mode, basically a rush mode, which is more like faster and cheaper. And I'm very surprised by Kimi K 2.5, but what they have been able to accomplish. It's, I think, the new GLM model, I think GLM 5. It's supposed to be also really impressive, but I haven't tested it yet. I am in general, like, I think Kimi K 2.5 is an in-4 model. And for that, it's like, I am crazily impressed of how well it works. It's still not at the level of like an Opus 4.5. I would set it equivalent to something like a Sonnet 4. But the distance between them, I think, is diminishing. And the question is whether the big labs can continue the leaps they're doing. And I'm surprised also by the big labs, like Anthropic and OpenAI especially. Like the leaps between 4.5 codecs and 5.3 codecs is immense. And also, I think like Opus 4 to Opus 4.5 was also a step change in quality. So we aren't hitting these like limits or diminishing returns yet. There are still like leaps they are making of models getting way better. And if that just continues, I would expect like you still have an advantage in the big labs. If it at some point starts to diminish, I think like the Chinese models will be able to actually catch up. But whether they can replicate like all the like RLHF setup that the big labs have right now, I'm not sure. It's because what you have to think about is like the trajectories of codecs for coding. They are getting longer and longer, and they're getting better and better. So they can just train on the trajectories that Codex itself is putting out, which are better than the previous version. So they can just train on the synthetically generated data as well. And I think like through that, it's like, I'm not sure whether these two labs just have like such a massive data advantage with the step changes they are still making that it might be hard for open source to catch up. But it's like, I think that's just, it's guesswork. You don't know like what will happen and whether they can continue doing the same thing.
Yeah, a lot of it seems to be data, and scaffolding. That being said, you mentioned that you guys are doing something. You guys, who are you guys? What is AMP?
Yeah, so I'm working at AMP. I would say like we have been set equivalent to like the Porsche of coding agent. I think it's a meme out there. I think like Claude Code is often set equivalent to like Homer's car of like this over-engineered, like everything is bolted on. It's like what we are building is basically like more of an omakase experience. Like you don't have a model picker. We engineer everything, and we basically test all the models. And when we say a model is better, we will replace basically the main model driving AMP behind the scenes and put it in place for you. So we spend a lot of time like engineering the harness. Like harness is basically like the tool descriptions, the tools AMP has, the additional affordances a user has around like context engineering, and also like the system prompts for the models and the different models, and testing like also the like open provider, like the new Chinese models, and actually seeing like, okay, bang for your buck. Where do you as a developer get the most performance for your money? But we are also like saying, if you want the best performance, you have to pay for it at the moment. So we don't have a subscription. We only pass on like the token costs one-to-one to the users. And I think like this surprises a lot of people because AMP seems very expensive. But I think like you see like how much is at the moment subsidized in like Claude Code and Codex and the Gemini CLI, because the models are very expensive. But I think like to get the best results and to be the most productive with agents, you at the moment want to use the best models and not like a smaller or open source one, which just has way worse performance and produces way worse code.
Fascinating. So what would you say are then the remaining open challenges in this agentic LLM space, now specifically focusing on coding agents? Is it just more tools? Is it just waiting for better base models, or are the base models already good enough and it's just about scaffolding and improving prompting, or just systems where your scaffolding prompts the user to improve the prompt and be more concise or more detailed in what he or she expects?
It's, I think, like Thorsten Ball, which is basically the dictator of AMP from our team. He had a post yesterday that he is the bottleneck. And he realized that he was in Slack and basically took like a good bug report from a customer of ours and just copy and pasted it in the model, and the model one-shotted it and pushed it up, and it was released. And he was basically the bottleneck because he had to paste like the bug report into the coding agent, and then it just went on and fixed it. And I think like the models right now are good enough to do like most of the work, which is common in the enterprises, which is like, hey, I have an issue, the issue is taken, or I have a bug report, the bug report is taken, it's completed, and it's pushed. And I think like the challenge is rather the human side and the orchestration side. Like the pickup of the bugs, like most of the bug reports, they shouldn't go through like a developer's hand. I think like they should go to the agent, and then we actually have to have something which is an unsolved problem. Like, when is it safe for the agent to push directly, and when should it go to something like a pull request and go through human eyes? I think like this is one of the big unsolved problems. But also like all the workflows at the moment, everything is designed to be human driven. And I think like this is the big challenge now. Like, agents will be the main workforce for coding. And I think like this is an entirely different system. It's an entirely different way of working. And getting to that, I think like requires new primitives. I think like issues should be dead. Like, no one enjoys them anyway. It's like having a completely separate, isolated system for that also doesn't make any sense. Most of the stuff should be picked up instantly and then it's solved, or it should be just ignored. So we famously at AMP, we don't have issue tracking. So we usually pick up the bugs that we see and handle them ourselves instantly. And when something gets lost, it gets lost. And I think like this is an instant prioritization because it wasn't important enough. And I think like this, but scaled up to like bigger enterprises, you need different systems around that, which actually pick up the work, I think like not prioritize it, but actually like decide whether it's worth fixing, then push it up, decide whether it should go to a human review, and then flag it to the human to look at the code. I think like the majority of software engineering will be that, because the majority of software engineering is like not inventing new systems. And I think like for inventing new systems, you need humans. Like, you still need creativity. You need them to find new approaches to problems, to re-architect. I don't think like they are at the level of like Eric Schmidt or the really great developers who developed like languages, or like Linus Torvald developed Linux. Like, I don't think like without having it in the training data, an agent could have developed it. I think like there you still need a human driving the innovation. But I think like for the majority of software work, they should run on autopilot. And I think like this is what's missing. Like, how do we actually send it to the agent? How do we orchestrate and keep an overview of all of that? How do we actually then delegate to a human the important decisions? How do we make all the decision making around like, hey, how to architect a system? What's worth building? What am I working on next? Like, what are new features idea that are actually worth picking up? And I think like this is more of like the human system, which has to be figured out, and not so much the agent itself anymore.
Yeah, I can again second that. I think the caveat here is very important, that it is not a solution to everything. It's a solution to most of the mundane and more repetitive things, right? I'm working in research, previously just very blue sky research, where it's completely, everything's completely novel, basically, and now more it seems like more as on the applied side now. But even here, I'm doing research and I want to run experiments. I want to test hypotheses, and I can have a hypothesis and discuss this hypothesis with an LLM, but just telling an LLM, hey, this is an open problem in this world. Come up with hypotheses to how to solve it. Like, that's very hard for humans, for professional human researchers to do. They've been spending their lives trying to figure that out. Like, it's very hard. But I can say that I'm spending a lot of time on the design docs for like big features, big new experiments, a new hypothesis that requires like big changes in the code base potentially. And there I'm really hammering down this design doc and being very meticulous with every single decision, such that it's maintainable, it's extendable to future, for example, for future ideas that I already have in mind. So I'm doing all this high-level decision making, and also low-level decisions on what library perhaps to use. And let's not use this library because it would add a new dependency for our big system with like Docker that's annoying, whatever, right? And I spend like multiple hours, perhaps sometimes, on one design doc. And when I'm happy with that, I let it go and I'm like, this is magic. But it doesn't work just for everything. Just letting it do whatever, right?
Yeah. I also feel like the base models are sometimes for like this creative stuff and more like out of the box creativity are sometimes more interesting because they are like completely out of whack. They are not aligned to human opinion. They are just like raw dumps of data and they are doing some weird stuff. And I think it's always more interesting to just like when you're having like a problem or a wild idea, just throw it in a base model, let it generate like 20 different answers and look through them just for like wild ideas. Because they have seen so much stuff and they are so raw and untrained on like human opinion that usually you find like more of the like creative and out of the box approaches in them.
Is there a particular base model that you would recommend to use here? Because like obviously the big providers don't give you the base models right there.
Yeah, it's like Quen has a few. Olmo is one which LNAI has trained. Olmo is probably the one I'm using the most just because like I'm using it just for my own learning, just to test out some RL stuff, test out some pre-training stuff. So I'm using that the most, and that's like what I'm grabbing. You can also go to the really old models like GPT-3. They're all on Hugging Face and just test out them. And they also like they are trained on all the data, so this was like pre-AI slop on the internet. So they have like also some of the less biased stuff.
Yeah, and one other question here is how much evaluation and optimizing of like system prompts and tool descriptions do you need to do to add new models to AMP to make sure that you get the most out of them? Just a kind of anecdote is that like in my own experience working at Google, like the models are very sometimes sensitive to tool names, for example, to the extent that they may even ignore tool descriptions, which is crazy. But
it's a shit ton. Like we have our own eval setup. I think like it's getting more sophisticated now. Like for a long time we said like evals aren't that valuable. Now we are flipping that around a little bit and doing actually, because I think like LLM as a judge becomes a little bit more trustworthy because the LLMs are really good at coding and also evaluating code. So I think like their opinions are a little bit more valid when you actually ask them to determine how good like one conversation and the outputted code is. So we are doing more evals now for like tuning the like system prompt, tool descriptions and different tools. It's usually like it's a shit ton of work. And in most cases, like I do a lot of it. It's quite frustrating because often like it has a misbehavior and you're like sitting on the system prompt for like a few days to actually try to get it out. And there is always some misbehavior that's popping up fresh when you do like another change. And there are like so many levels. You have like the system prompts, you have the code base. the agent is in, which also informs this decision. Like the behavior in something like Rust is really different than in something like Python. And when you're building like a general tool, it has to work across a lot of code bases and across of scenarios and across of like different instructions. Like how users phrase things is usually quite different. So it has to be quite general. And I think like this is more the challenging part, which is really hard to automate. Actually, like this like vibe check, does it behave correctly? Is it interacting well with the user? And is it actually outputting good code? And what I think like often a lighter hand and giving less instructions and less tools is more valuable than having a lot of really explicit tools. Like we have GPT 5.3 and 5.2 codecs running right now, and I'm tuning 5.3 codecs, and I think like we have 4 tools enabled, which is basically like a bash tool, reading files, and editing files like apply patch, and one more for reading threads, and that's it. And this is working already well, and I rarely need anyone else. So it's like tuning in a lot of cases is actually deciding like what isn't necessary anymore. Like from the previous generation, like what tools, what instructions in the system prompt, I just don't need anymore because it's trained in, or the behavior changed so much that I, for example, don't need sub-agents anymore because it's just running. It can run for like 500k tokens instead of 100k, which are useful. So I don't need the additional context window of sub-agents. And this is like, it's always a little bit of balance, but I always like to opt into like the direction, hey, I'm subtracting instead of adding.
Okay, so in a very practical sense now, you are so there are 2 questions that I want to ask. You as an actual developer of these coding scaffolding, let's just call it coding agents, the coding scaffolding, what would you say are the most important concepts or learnings that people need to know if they want to tweak their own agent perhaps, or make it more, make it work better? You mentioned that how you design the code base itself is insanely important. So what would you in a practical sense recommend people to do to make their code base more agent friendly?
So what concepts are important? I think the tool calling for one, then the system prompt, also like tool descriptions and the argument names, like how that is fed into the model and how they've been trained on it. And I think like I always like to go back into like look at the raw output and input of an LLM. Like take GPT OSS, which is the closest model to like one of the frontier models of how it actually looks like, and look at the raw data streams. What the model sees is just a raw blob of text. And the tool calls are just like an additional token or syntax on top, which is basically like an XML tag and a JSON blob afterwards the model generates, and then a closing XML tag. And then this is basically interpreted as a function call and returned as a function call. And there isn't so much magic behind it. But at the same time, you have to understand it that all the tokens which are in the context window influence the next decision of the model. So this is what like context engineering used to be a lot about, that you want to keep it clean because the model often took wrong decisions and failed at tool calls. And this influenced the next token which was generated, ergo the next decisions the model makes. And there is like a million micro decisions the model has to make in like implementing something, like which files to read, what to edit, how to name a function. And the like having like bad, incorrect information in there usually, or ambiguous information usually hurts you a lot. And I think like this context engineering, it's getting swallowed by the model a bit at the moment because they're getting so good that the likelihood of like failed tool calls and wrong decisions is going down. And the setting up the code base, I think like for making it easier for the model will become really important because you can increase the likelihood of right decisions even more. And one of the main things is like the agents.md file or Claude.md file, which you have in the root of the projects, which should be basically like an onboarding. Like, what is this repo even about? What are we doing here? And what are the important commands I can run, like for formatting, linting, testing, and also like what's like a rough layout, like where can I go, what's in the different files. And this is like the base setup which you have to comply with. And then like over time, you should always try to, hey, what are the failure modes of the model? Like when it's doing something wrong or it doesn't comply to your expectations, like actually ask yourself, like, what in my code base or in my instructions actually pointed it in the wrong direction, and how can I improve that? And a lot of the stuff is like shit that lives in developers' head. Like there is so much not written down information about a code base, about a business problem, about a domain, which lives in the developer's head, which the model doesn't have, so it makes wrong decisions. And this is always stuff like at the end of a thread when it was shit, I actually sit down, okay, like how could I prevented that? Often it's like lazy instructions because my input is garbage. Like the later it gets in the day, the lazier I get. So I just like copy paste like bug reports, which are really bad. But also sometimes it's like conflicting information. Like documentation is always outdated. And this is really bad for the model of it, because when it reads in a README about like how this is implemented or the architecture or where to add stuff, like it will follow that. Also, like when it's like a wrong formatter, or like you give him the wrong commands, it should run npm instead of bun or whatever, also bad. And then domain knowledge, like when it's just like missing information about how stuff works in the real world, which it will make stuff up. It will extrapolate based on the information it has, and it's just probably not extrapolating correctly. And this is always stuff like I like to write down. I put it in my agents.md file. I put it in a docs folder and basically refer to it. And there are like all these little things, like just bring the knowledge down, make it explicit, and try to always like, how can I make the agent better and perform correctly in like the next run, instead of just like thinking, hey, I'm delegating work to you.
And question for you. So this is more of a software engineering question. So you've obviously been talking about like not having issues and just like putting these bug reports in, having the LLM generate the answer, or the solution, the patch, the pull request. And then how do you manage like CI/CD, right? Like, do you have, another LLM agent kind of review the pull request, and like in the future, near future, do you allow the kind of submission? And then if it submits, obviously it goes live in some kind of dev environment or auto push within some short time frame. And then do you have LLM agents connect to the website, curl it, like navigate on the website with Claude web browser use? And then does it go to prod automatically, or is that pipe dream right now?
How it works in our code base, it goes to prod, and our CI/CD, like of course we have a pretty good test suite. We have formatting, like whatever runs in CI, and then deployment goes to prod instantly. And like we have releases scheduled because like we are client side usually running, and they are running like every few hours or when manually triggered, and they run automatically as well. And we use our own product so much and dog food so heavily that like usually we are the first ones to catch a bug. And if we introduce a bug, we are fast to roll back. So we don't have a lot of pull requests. If like, I think I haven't done any in like half a year. We are all pushing directly to main in our code base, and everyone is responsible for his own code. And
Jeez.
It's like, for us, it's like you own your own shit. Like if it breaks, you fix it, and you're responsible for it. And it's like we are trusting that each developer actually tests it before pushing. But in the end, it's like not mandatory. But it's mandatory that you actually like fix your stuff. And in a lot of things, like you have to decide like how elaborate of a test do I have to make. Like if it's an adjustment in the front end or in our rendering logic, like I can just look at it, looks right, I can push it. Like I probably don't need to review the LLM generated code. When it's touching like core logic of our thread worker, for example, where it's like I'm doing a lot of stuff in there. Like I know it by heart, so I can look at the code and say like, hey, okay, this looks roughly right, but I will still always spin up a dev version, test it, run a few things, see that everything works, add some debug logs and tell the agent, hey, does this look correctly? And do some validations before I actually push it. So I think like the level of validation I myself do before I push to prod depends on where and what I'm working on. And when we are going into an area where it's running more automated, I think like this will be like a really hard challenge to fix, because like how does the agent actually decide like what should be validated by a human or more heavily. And I don't have an answer for it right now. I'm not sure. I think like this is a big thing to figure out. I think like we have to probably change a lot around software engineering and our setups, that we actually can run way more integration tests and build that in more. Like we have a setup for like tmux, which basically instructs the agent to just spin up a dev instance of itself and send keys to it so it can test itself and then inspect the logs or whatever. And I think like our code bases in the future have to be molded more towards the agent so it can run stuff more automatically and it can actually validate it works. So we have actually the more trust that the output is, first of all, functional correct. And it still works as intended. And I think like doing stuff in that direction will become more standard. And I think like OpenClaw, like Peter is doing some interesting stuff. He has basically the core logic is wrapped in a CLI. So the agent can just spawn the CLI, send user queries, and he sees like whether this is working correctly. And when it's working correctly, like it's like I'm trusting the models enough that it's like I can push it up. And then the taste component is something I think entirely different. Like the models are often writing like not the perfect code, not putting it in the right modules, not modularizing right, or like there are dependencies, like two modules are communicating information that shouldn't be communicated, the other module shouldn't care about, or something is passed down, which just shouldn't because it should be handled somewhere else. I think like this is still very in the human domain right now because I don't think the models are always trained on the best code, or they have a lot of garbage code in the training data. So a lot of the patterns that you would actually want for like enterprise code bases are just not trained in. But I think like this is stuff over time. You see how it fails and you can put that in like the agent.m files and the instructions to guide it better. At the moment, I think this still requires human like interjection, and there are always like there will be parts of the work which will be human driven. And I think like architecture, designing the system, designing like the boundaries of the system, like how information flows, I think this is still very much in the human domain. They will get better at it because you can train on that data, or like on higher quality code. But it's like it's always a little bit different because it's like a lot personal preference. And I think like this is still up to you. And I think like this is where like your instructions and your guidance still comes in. So yeah, I babbled a lot.
Yeah. So as a kind of like a comment on this, so after working at Google for 12 and a half years, obviously it's a very large software company with 100,000-ish engineers developing all parts of the code base. And also it's got a giant mono repo, right? So even if your team's small code base didn't change, things you depend on did change, right? So CI/CD is a huge consideration at Google, and the kind of standard practice is that every 2 hours, your binary will be built and deployed to auto push. And then it will be running an auto push, for those 2 hours until the next build and deploy. And then depending on how you've configured things, it'll roll out to staging maybe every day, and then prod Monday to Thursday. And it's funny, just having worked in a world where that is the norm, that's kind of even how I think about my like vibe coded side projects. Like I have a personal website Claude Code built me, and I have it like set up to like auto deploy when I git push, right? On my main branch. And it's funny because I'm like, ooh, Codex generated me a pull request, better not like merge it till I've like run it locally and verified it, just because I might brick it. Whereas, I would like to be able to just push it to like auto push and, navigate to a slightly different URL and be able to see, yeah, works. And even more than that, I don't think I even need to do that, right? I think, an LLM could use this kind of browser use to just navigate the page and make sure everything works. I didn't make any egregious breakages. I mean, as you say, I do already have like testing, and LLMs are great for generating like comprehensive test coverage. And, there are obviously things like these kind of front end testing frameworks where they, interact with the like JavaScript, TypeScript elements. So I can definitely do that too. But I don't know of the kind of state of the art solution in this space yet, but it definitely strikes me that I would be happy to have like a few hours of latency between going to prod if it meant that, there was like almost zero risk like of me breaking, I think.
Yeah. What I'm always questioning is like how much difference is there to write now. Because like I have a lot of like, I think Navan, which is like this flight booking software. I have the biggest pet peeve, which tells me like their developers are not actually looking or clicking through the UI. They pre-fill like the starting airport, but it's actually just like, it's not really pre-filled as a value. It's only set in the display. And every time I get hit by that, when I try to find a flight, that it's like I click search and it tells me, hey, the starting airport isn't set yet. And it's like, if you go through that flow once as a developer, this will annoy the shit out of you and you will fix it. So it's like, there are so many bugs in our systems that also like code review doesn't catch. Because it's like, what is code review? Like most of them, it's like on GitHub, you scroll through the code and it's like LGTM looks good to me and send it. And like code review should be like, you can't look at code in isolation, which a diff is. Like a diff is isolated. You have to look at the surrounding system. You should pull it down, walk through it, test it, click through the changes, actually try to validate it. But it's like, this is just like not realistic because we all have shit to work on. And I think like the agent, like he could theoretically do it. Is it worth the amount of tokens? Him clicking through like URI as well, which is like usually like a large blob of HTML, which is really annoying for the agent to use. I'm not sure. I think like there will be better systems. I would say like, is it worth doing? Maybe, but I would guess no.
Fascinating. Yeah, it's at some point maybe also the actual computer use agents that can actually move the mouse and click on stuff and don't have to look at HTML will get better and help to that extent. But what I wanted to follow up on it was something that you said about where you described how you are constantly optimizing your code base or your agents.md file or thinking about all of that for how to improve the agent, right? And I mean, you're working at AMP, you're literally building coding agents. So that is, you are by doing that directly optimizing your product. But for me, for example, when I'm working on my main task, let's say, and I spend time optimizing my agent workflow such that in future it might not make a mistake that it did now, there's always this fine balance, right, between spending a full day just optimizing your agents.md file such that the agent can then be more effective in the next session versus actually doing what you're supposed to do. So I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on, do you have an intuition for how much time you should spend over optimizing your agents.md file instead of doing like your actual work?
And the amount of time I spent on my NeoVim config, it's like the amount of work days. I think like I don't want to know it. And the amount of time I spend on it, I don't think it's so much, to be honest. Like I think it's like a fraction of the time. It's rather when I'm really seeing, hey, this thread or like this, like thread is basically one conversation with the agent for us. This thread was really garbage. Like I'm always like sitting down and trying to figure out like, why is that? Like it's partly because it's my job. Yeah. Because it could be like in our harness or in our product as well. So this is for me to figure out, but it could also be from the setup. So it's like, it's usually what I'm doing when I'm hitting something which really surprises me, which is out of the norm, where I'm like, hey, what has happened here? Like, why is this so garbage? Or also when I have the reverse, when I have like a really good thread where I'm thinking like, hey, it has one shot at this like this solution. Like I probably have written really good instructions at the top which contain really good information about the code base. And then I'm like scrolling up and actually, okay, can I put this in like my agents.md or in some kind of docs in some way? But it's like on most threads where it's just like, hey, okay, it performed as expected, I'm not doing it. So it's like more over time, or when I'm hitting something more and more, like where it's introducing like subtle bugs or we are running in the same bug over and over again, then I'm thinking, okay, how can I get the agents to actually like not do it? Like either I'm adding it like an integration test or a test for this specifically, or I'm giving him a validation loop, like a tool to call, or like a CLI, a small one, like a custom one, which it can use, or something for UI work, like a storybook, which we have for our CLI and for our UI, which it basically can call to screenshot the component it worked on. How can I add stuff like that into the code base so it's can validate its work, so it's less likely that it does the same mistake again. So it's not a direct answer to how much time should you spend on it. It's like, I think like when you're surprised by something, actually try to figure out why. And I think like this is also like how you get better at it. It's like always ask like, why isn't performing as expected? Like, why is it doing something wrong? And I think like this is very coding related. Like you're always asking like, hey, drill down. And I think this is something I see less and less right now, because it's so easy to just like give really stupid instructions, and a lot of the time it works. Like, fix this bug, and then there's like the follow-up, fix this, and just tell it to loop on itself and improve. And because it's so easy and they give you so like good looking output, it's often like easier to just like garbage instruction, not reflect on it, not learn anything, because you still get the end result which you actually cared about. And like what I'm a little bit afraid of is like, my skills are definitely degrading. Like I can't handwrite the same code I used to be able to handwrite because I'm now used to it. So I'm also like always thinking about like, how can I, what is something I still should learn or be really careful about? And for me, that's like a lot of the thinking part, like the design, like the system design, how information flows. Like sit down, write it on paper. Like I don't do this with the agent. I might brainstorm, but in the end, like the final architecture, I usually write on paper because I want to spend my brain cells and not lose that capability. At the same time, like one day a week, I don't use coding agents. I hand code because I think like I want to stay in touch still with like a little bit of the craft of things. So I still maintain some capabilities.
And one thing you said there, this idea of, when you're surprised by something, figure out why. This is actually just generally good life advice, I think, beyond coding agents, right? Like, if you find that something kind of surprised you, then worth looking into it more. If the perplexity is too high, maybe you should train on some of that data,
Yeah. Double click on it.
Yeah, there's so much crazy stuff that one can learn. But one thing that you mentioned that probably everyone knows by now because it went mega viral is OpenClaw, Moltbot, Claudebot, whatever you want to call it. Can you perhaps give us, first of all, a rundown of what this OpenClaw is, right? Why is it different than Claude Code or whatever?
I think like OpenClaw, so Peter Steinberger, interesting dude. You should follow him. He has been like, I think like he made his money, so the startup retired and came back because of coding agents, because he found the space so interesting. And in general, he has a lot of interesting thoughts and he's often really ahead of the time. And I think the OpenClaw is an experiment of what, if you extrapolate like the next 5 years out, what can a personal assistant, like an AI personal assistant be? Which has basically access to your entire life, all your data without any restrictions, and you give it a shit ton of tools. Like cybersecurity, like I can't use it on my work laptop. I have it running on a Mac Mini because I'm a security guy, got a little bit afraid. And you also shouldn't run it on your work laptop. And it's like it's basically extrapolated to the max. Like what can you do with the models? It's really expensive right now, but it's also a really interesting experiment. And it has a file system, it's running an agent in a loop, and it has a heartbeat. So basically it wakes up on a cron schedule like every 10, every 50, every 30 minutes, and basically has your system prompt and some instructions of what it should do. And you can also trigger it. So it has a pretty broad interface, which is like, it's marvelously engineered. Like you have to look at the code. Like you have a really good entry point from like Telegram, WhatsApp, from whatever you want to use. And you can basically also send it messages, ask it stuff, or tell it, hey, do this work, remind me of this. And it can automatically basically create cron jobs for itself, create reminders for itself, look at all your different personal information, hook into Notion or wherever you have your files stored, look through your email, send emails. Like you can give it access to everything so it can manage your life. If you use it, I would say like put it up in a sandbox. Don't give it access to everything. Give it maybe like its own email. But so it's really risky because it can be prompt injected so easily. Like I think like it's a really good research area because no company could have put that out. Like this could have only come from like open source or like SOTA developers because it's so risky and the liability risk and the abuse risk is so high. But I think like it will push the space forward by such a bit because it pulls all the problems that arise from such an over-the-top solution into the present, and you can see them. And like the biggest one is prompt injection and cybersecurity because it has all the information, it can leak it. Because a lot of people can't set up dev boxes or sandboxes properly, it's publicly accessible and anyone can just hit your endpoints. Because it reads data from skills which are written by other people or uses tools from them or hits public websites, it can be prompt injected because on these websites, there can be instructions to your agents to do something, like leaking your credit card information if you gave it to it.
So actually, this is interesting that you say this thing about it being like a preview of things to come. I don't know if you remember, but in like end of March in 2023, shortly after GPT-4 appeared, there was this like, I don't know, was it open source project called Auto GPT? And it was basically like a preview of like things to come. It was like Claude Code, but not nearly as good a year and a half earlier, right? And again, it was the same kind of concept, right? Somebody had released this, GPT-4 connected, LLM running locally in your terminal. But yeah, it's obviously with many more sort of security trust caveats than you'd have with using something that's more robustly engineered.
And this is, I think, like the LLM space, like what makes it so interesting, I think like it's also very research heavy. And by research, I mean, it's like experimental. You just try shit out and see if it works. And when the next model generation comes out, like the stuff that didn't work in the last one, you can try it again and see if it works now because the models become much more capable. And I think this makes the space so interesting because what didn't work in the last generation because it was too over the top or too complicated for the model might work in the next one. And I think like this like really experiment driven, like throw shit at the wall and see what sticks is what actually makes LLMs really good and makes you figure out like, okay, what actually works? What can you build here?
Yeah, I agree. I also saw like an episode where Boris Cherny, nice name, was interviewed, and yeah, if I recall correctly, he said something like, "Yeah, our product, we were building Claude Code, and it just wasn't working, and then internally we got access to the next model, and just like that, it started working." And it's very experimental. You can be ahead of the time, and kind of. It's still a bet, right? You're still hoping that the base models will improve and that it will become more like better and better, more and more reliable with less and less scaffolding, right? So I think that's one really interesting point. But what I wanted to actually ask you is how does ClaudeBot, OpenClaw, sorry, compared to Claude Cowork, right? I mean, that's like a tool for non-developers. How much do you think that this kind of LLM assistant can help with non-coding tasks in the real world?
I think like OpenClaw was what Cowork could be if Anthropic wouldn't think about like any cybersecurity restrictions. And I think like it's designed to be over the top. And I think like OpenClaw, because like people who are using it are very likely to be developers. The stuff which is it used on is a little bit different. Like Cowork is usually like enterprise people who are working like in Word and Excel. So it's a very different target audience. So it can't be so like far out there because I think like the steps or like the trust into the models, which now like most developers have, that they can produce good code. I might still have to review it, but they produce good code. I can't just delegate work to them. The trust isn't there yet, I think, in a lot of other domains, that you can't just delegate stuff to it. And I think like this has to still be built up. And I think like OpenClaw, because it's targeted mostly at developers, like you already have that. Like they trust them. You can't just delegate work to it. I think like OpenClaw is also a lot more LLM native. And what I mean by that, like they know like how to build tools and skills so the LLM can use them. Cowork is built for like excellent Word. And I think like excellent word, aren't well suited for LLMs. Like they have data models which are really complicated for the LLM probably to interpret, because in Excel you, for example, have like 3 different layers of data, basically for the raw numbers, for your formulas, and I think there's one more which is like presentation layer or something. And I think for the future you want software that molds to the agent, I would say, which is easy for the agent to use and abuse, instead of something that's actually made for the human. Because I don't think we will be the primary consumer of of any software, or we will be looking at what is done in it, but not really driving it. So the interfaces can also be really different and way simpler. And I would say like Markdown is way more suited for the agent because it's so simple, as opposed to Work, which has like all this custom logic, custom encodings, which make it really annoying to work with and also manipulate.
That's really cool. Yeah, to put that in perspective, to think about the big shift in writing code is to refactor your whole code base to make it more agent friendly. That's really fascinating. So I guess that being said, that code will change a ton, be it in research, how people do research on LLMs, or also non-LLM research, AI or biology, chemistry, all the real hard sciences, right? How LLMs can influence all these domains is yet still to be explored. But to stick within the AI space, do you think that currently it is a great time to work in AI, or is it a rather difficult one? Because this is a question that thinks about projecting into the future, right? In the near future, where do you think things are going? Where will we be at in 2027 Q1? Dario Amadei says that we'll have AGI and we'll be in the post-money era. Okay, sure. But coding agents will probably improve a bit more, and this will change how we work. And many younger people are scared of that. What do you think is the future going to be like, and how does it influence people that want to get into it now?
A small question. Should you be scared of it? Yes, I am too. Like it's automating a lot of like what I learned for a long time in my life. I think like for coding, like what you learned in university and over the years, yeah, you learned concepts, but you also just learned a lot of syntax, so you can actually produce and write the code. And I think like all of that knowledge, like which I spent like years learning, are like completely useless now, or like mostly useless to like 95%. And this is like, I think like I sent Max my blog post, which I titled like Kirby is eating context engineering. And Kirby for me is like, Kirby, who doesn't know, is like this pink Nintendo character which swallows like magicians and then acquires the capabilities. And I feel like LLMs are like that. They acquire more and more capabilities and consume more and more. And I think like all this stuff which is like in this bits domain, eventually like the LLMs will get better and better at it. Like it's just a matter of time. So more and more of my work will be taken over by the LLM. And am I afraid of it? Yeah, it's like I'm spending a lot of my days where I'm just like sitting in front of it and I'm like dumbfounded. It's like it's doing stuff and it's finding stuff and it's taking trade-offs, which I didn't consider, but it just does because it has read a file which I didn't see or didn't notice. And I think like how do you handle that? I think like staying adaptive, staying malleable, learning new stuff. Like I'm now going back at a lot of the fundamentals and going closer to the hardware, like a lot of systems engineering and embedded engineering. This is what I'm doing right now. Just like for one, to stay sharp, for the other, just to beat my fear a bit that I might be completely useless as a software engineer in the near future or in the next few years. So I think like finding a domain, I think like you want to be in something where you're actually the best at and where you're way better than the agent. I think like someone who's like a average software engineer will have a really hard time when you're not an expert at something. I think something like compiler engineers, like when you're one of the best in the world, like they will still have a job. Like LLMs won't automate them, or like they will use LLMs, but they will still be necessary to do a lot of the really big design decisions. And I think like stuff with hardware, like more creative areas, like I think like research is one of them. This is also still in the human domain. A lot of the interpersonal stuff is also a lot in the personal domain. I think like podcasting or whatever. A lot of the hardware stuff, it's like models won't be good at that. At some point, they might become better, but it still requires a lot of human effort, human input, because you actually have to handle atoms and not just bits. So this is like a lot more long lasting before AI can actually take an impact on that, especially when you look at the like rate of progress in robotics. So I think like just like keep learning is what I do, and try to really specialize in certain areas. For me, like what I do a lot of, like I specialize in LLMs, like whether it's training or using them or designing products around them. It might be at some point that LLMs might be good at it, but at the moment, like when I ask like whatever models, like improve your system prompt, I'm seeing these failure cases. Usually it's quite shit. And this is like, try to specialize in something, really be good at it, so you're driving the LLM, and or go into domains which aren't to be touched by something AI related soonish. But like I think like fear is a necessary emotion, because it forces you or drives you to change something or move into a certain direction. It just shouldn't paralyze you.
It's like with every big, you could I think it's valid to call this a revolution, right? I mean, industrial revolution was a huge fear for many people, lost their job, but it did arguably but make the world a better place. Like, this is still the best time in humanity. lowest deaths, highest wealth across the world, fewest starving people, whatever you want to consider here. But yeah, maybe the power of being in the space of atoms rather than just pure bits, maybe that's a good call. I feel like this year AI for science might take off, because LMs can cross boundaries and go into like the physical domain, like via humans, or make humans more productive in the physical domain. So maybe that's a good call. Maybe it's just finding real world problems and trying to solve real world problems.
Yeah, it's like, I think like I think one thing I know, like I'm agentic, like Max said it, I'm like, I keep learning stuff, and I think like as long as you're not idle, you can adapt to whatever comes. I think like not even Dario can predict what will happen in the next years. Like model progress might stall completely. We might had a financial recession and the whole market comes tumbling, and everyone is annoyed by AI, and like they just don't continue training the same models anymore because they don't have the money. Like there is so much shit which could happen. No one can really predict it. So you have to react to it anyhow. So I think like just like being adaptable and learning stuff like is your best bet. And I think like you said, it's a little bit like an industrial revolution, because a lot of the knowledge work is now being taken over by machines. Like what used to basically be human labor being taken over by machines is now the knowledge work. But still, like we are still employed. We still have people working on like factory lines or being the engineers. Usually the work just shifts into like other areas. And whether that's like more creative domains or whatever you want to do, it's like, I think like there will be something you still have to do. I don't think it is a future where we'll all be living on UBI and machines will be doing all the work for us, because I think this is also like kind of a shit future. I think like humans should still like learn and strive to do something better than they did yesterday.
Yeah, I agree. I think as long as there are problems in the world, there will be a need for humans to solve these problems, given the set of tools that we have. And the people that can solve problems by adapting and learning what tools we have, the agentic people, if I may say so, they will thrive under these new tools. But yeah, and also if you consider people you can still, it's many people just don't care about AI chess games, AI versus AI. I mean, nobody watches that. People still watch humans play, although the AIs are much better because they get more excited about some Magnus Carlsen getting pissed off and, I don't know, running out of the room when he loses or whatever, right? So it's hard to predict. It's hard to predict, and fear is a very standard emotion here. But I think if we just continue to learn, and I hope that this podcast helped with learning. We had a lot of content that we covered. Nicolay was a phenomenal guest. He shared so many insights that I personally learned from. So I at least learned something. I can improve my work, and hopefully other people can benefit from this as well. Any last words from anyone here?
Yeah, so thank you for presenting on our podcast, for being interviewed. It was amazing talking to you again. Every time I talk to you, I learn a lot, which is, I don't know, every 6 months or a year, I show up in Munich and we hang out. So hopefully I have to keep it a tradition, you know. Someday you should come to Zurich. It's not that far away, you know.
Yeah, I have to come
Japan
to
is
Zurich.
also
But
a hub.
yeah, it's like Japan is a big hub. It's like for Zurich, like the likelihood that you're in Zurich when I swing by is like very low. So
My bad.
Okay, everyone. This was phenomenal. Thank you everyone for joining in, and see you in the next one. Bye.
see
Thank
you
you.
guys.